Dativ and Akkusativ are probably the things that scare German learners most when it comes to grammar. Are you among these people? That's probably why you're watching this video. There I'd like to explain to you how you can deal with that, how you can deal with the uncertainty of the genders, and which case to choose, which ending to choose, so you have a framework that makes it maybe a little bit easier for you. But first of all, let me tell you that Dativ and Akkusativ are enormously overrated. You learn them very early on in German classes, and this is a good thing because you want to know how the German language functions. But when you speak German, they are way less relevant, or I would almost say they're irrelevant. Because if I say something like, ich spreche mit einem Freund, or ich spreche mit einem Freund, which is wrong, or ich spreche mit ein Freund, which is even more wrong, do you even hear the difference? I can barely hear the difference. If your pronunciation is good, I'm totally fine. There's no misunderstanding. Nothing can go wrong. So therefore, if you want to focus on speaking German correctly, then focus on the verbs. The verbs are really important. If you make a mistake with, like, for example, ich spreche, du sprichst. If you say something like du spreche or ich sprichst, I'm totally confused. I have no clue who you're talking about. So the verb forms are something you should learn. But dative and accusative, if you make a mistake with that, I will understand what you want to say. So therefore, this should never stop you from speaking German, because this is a barrier I keep seeing with students. They say something like, oh, I have to study more German grammar so I can be more confident about speaking. No, you will never be 100% confident, because even if you know all the endings, even if you know which case to choose after which preposition and so on, and even if this comes completely automatic to you, you might still be confused about the gender of a certain word. And you don't know the gender, well, then you can't come to the correct ending. So you will make mistakes with that even at an advanced level. This is totally normal. We even expect it. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just everyday life in Germany. So you don't need to worry about that. If you want to think about cases while you are speaking, meaning you have already some basic confidence of speaking German, you're not really scared of it, but you're not fluent yet, you're just doing your best, and maybe it's still a little clumsy from time to time and so on, you make a lot of mistakes, then what I encourage you to do is rather listen to how other people speak. So for example, taking the same example as before, when you make a mistake and you say, ich spreche mit ein Freund, and then the person you're talking to corrects you or repeats and says, du sprichst mit einem Freund. And then you listen, you're like, wait, she said mit einem Freund. Why did she say mit einem Freund? Yeah, of course, because mit is a dative preposition, so I need a dative ending. You see, that makes more sense. So don't think before you say something, think after you hear something. When people correct you, when you hear people talk in the bus and you hear they are using a specific ending in a specific situation, when you see signs somewhere and you see, why is this ending there? Just be curious about that, but don't think before you make a sentence. You don't have the time. If you want to learn it though, if you want to get used to it, then I suggest that you should think about cases when you're writing, because then you have time, you can think about the correct ending. It doesn't matter if you finish 5 seconds earlier or later. And then you need a very clear framework. And the first question, of course, to ask is, which case should you even choose? Is it dative? Is it accusative? And here we have 3 questions that we need to ask ourselves. The first one is, do we have a preposition that is not ambiguous? By this I mean a preposition that will always have the same case. If that is not the case, you have to ask yourself, do I have what I call a dual preposition? We call them Wechselpräpositionen in German, meaning these prepositions that demand a different case whether somebody is moving or not moving. And then you have to ask yourself, well, are we talking about a movement here or are we not? And if that is not the case either, if we have no preposition at all, then we need to ask ourselves, is it a direct or an indirect object? So if you're confused a little bit about all these expressions here, what is a preposition? Prepositions are these small words that explain to us the relationship between things, like to, for, of, in, into, out. These are prepositions. So in German, an, mit, zu, unter, and so on. These are prepositions. What do I mean by moving or not moving? In German, we make a big distinction very often between an activity that involves that something is not moving yet or that is moving. For example, to sit down or to sit. Like I'm sitting down, that's a movement, but to sit, I'm not doing anything, I'm not moving anymore. And we have a distinction between these two, and sometimes we use different cases. in these situations. And we have a lot of prepositions in German that will require Akkusativ when we're talking about a movement and Dativ when we're not talking about a movement. If we don't have a preposition at all, then we have to ask ourselves what is the object in the sentence. And here we have a few examples. So the preposition mit will always require Dativ. There's absolutely no exceptions, and therefore you have to say ich spreche mit dir, ich spreche mit einem Freund, or whatever. It has to be Dativ in all situations. As I just said, the question is, are you moving or are you not moving? So if you say ich gehe in den Wald, you're moving towards the forest. So that requires Akkusativ because it's a movement. Ich bin im Wald, well, then you're already there, you're not moving, at least you're not moving relatively to the forest. Then you would use Dativ, and then you would say in dem, which becomes im. So you can see that we have to be really, really analytical with this in German. When it comes to the prepositions that change the case, we have to know, are we moving or are we not moving? And then we have this question of direct or indirect object. Usually we only have a direct object, meaning we have a sentence, we have one person doing something, and we have the other person who is the victim of this activity. So ich sehe dich, I can see you. There are two people here involved, it's you and it's me. I am doing something, I'm looking, you are being looked at, you're passive, you're not doing anything, you're the object. And because you're the object, you are in accusative case. So I have to use the accusative pronoun, or I have to put the article or whatever other words I use for the object into accusative. However, we also have indirect objects. So we can have situations where two people or two kinds of objects, things, people are involved. For example, when I give the key to you. Now we have three people, and well, not people, but three subjects or objects involved. You, me, and the key. And of course, there's a difference between the key and you. You are the indirect object. You're benefiting from that action because you're getting the key, but your life is not going to change very much. For the key, this is rather dramatic. The key is changing the owner, so the key is the direct object. So in that situation, der Schlüssel, the direct object, will be in accusative, and du, the person who is benefiting from it, will be in Dativ, and therefore we choose ich gebe dir den Schlüssel. You cannot say ich gebe dich den Schlüssel, that would be wrong, because then it would mean that I give you and the key to somebody else who I'm not mentioning here. And lastly, we have a few verbs that only take Dativ objects. So I help you, ich helfe dir. You can see there are also only two people involved, you and me. I am doing something, I'm the subject, and you're getting my help, you're passive. But we use Dativ here. You cannot say ich helfe dich, you have to say ich helfe dir. We do that with a number of verbs where usually the other person is benefiting in some way from the action that is being performed. So now you know which case to choose. At least you have a framework, you have these three questions that you need to ask and check which case to use. Of course, you need to know what are the correct endings. Fortunately, there is a system for that. It's called Resenease. I've made a separate video on this, so you don't need to swim. It's a little bit tricky to understand at first glance, but once you get it, it's really, really helpful because the endings for the adjectives, for the articles, for the pronouns are always the same throughout these cases. It's completely predictable, and therefore I encourage you to watch this video and to work a little bit with this system. However, of course, in the long run, what will help you to really master this is to just practice a lot. Because once you hear sentences many, many times, you write them correctly many, many times, you say something like ich spreche mit dir, and it just comes naturally to you that it must be mit dir and not mit dich or mit du or whatever, then you don't need to think about it. You don't need to worry about this anymore. And this takes time. I have to be honest with you. Learning German takes time, takes energy. It's not something you can do within 3 months or another similar ridiculously short amount of time. It takes time. And therefore, I believe you have to make the process very interesting or pleasant as much as you can. And therefore, I've created a story-based German course that starts really from zero with the story getting more and more complicated, teaching you all the grammar, teaching you all the pronunciation, having tons of interactive exercises. If you're interested in that, check it out. Otherwise, I would also like to encourage you to look at the pronunciation because I believe the pronunciation is more important than grammar. So on this channel, you'll find a lot of pronunciation videos. Make sure to watch them also.